Well, good afternoon if you are in New York or the East Coast of the United States or even in Chicago. Good evening if you are in Dresden or perhaps in Berlin. Good evening, and I hope a very peaceful, safe evening to people in Ukraine. We love you. Good overnight to people further east. And aloha if you happen to be in Hawaii. My guest is Hawaiian, but he is in Dresden, Germany tonight. He is the wonderful baritone, Quinn Kelsey. Quinn, welcome.
How are you?
Great to see you. I should tell our listeners, apologies for the delay. We had internet issues. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on IDAGIO, the place where classical music happens. IDAGIO, as you know, is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. Quinn Kelsey, it only takes a moment to discover, is a baritone from his beautiful natural tones. So, Quinn, I'm about to ask you a question I've never asked a baritone.
Uh-oh.
It's the natural speaking voice for many men. You often talk to tenors and countertenors and so on, and their speaking voice is often a little different from their singing voice. But do you feel you live in your natural voice, or is your singing voice something that happens differently?
No, I do believe I tend to live in my opera voice tends to live in my speaking voice. If not exactly, it's pretty similar.
And this sounds like Oprah Winfrey, but how does that feel?
um, I mean, it feels pretty natural.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I have to uh, travel sort of any kind of great vocal distance from my speaking voice to my singing voice. I would say that the singing voice is just, well, it feels very much like an extension of the speaking voice.
Mm-hmm.
That my uh I guess you could say that a lot of people's uh speaking voices tend to be in the range of the middle slash chest voice, if they're a singer, or if they attempted to sing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously there are those singers whose singing voices don't necessarily sound like they match the speaking voice, but I generally, I would say that people's speaking voices are very akin to this similar range of their singing, what their singing voices would be or are.
I suppose the reason I ask, and I've worked in opera for literally centuries, the
Literally.
last one and the current one. I've worked in opera for, let's figure this out, 1972. So it's 50 years. Wow. What do you know about that? I began working in June of 1972 at the Lyric Opera of Chicago was my first job.
Wow.
And so almost 50 years. Wow. I know you're associated with the Lyric, and we'll talk about it in a moment.
Yes, sir.
But I think my thinking in the question was, I know tenors, I know sopranos whose spoken voice is somewhere in the middle to upper middle range,
Yep.
but whose mind goes to another place when they have to produce their singing voice. And
Right.
I guess what I was forming in my head, and have never asked a singer before, is what's it like to not have to think that way? Because, I've known tenors. I was a good friend of Pavarotti, and he had a high-ish speaking voice, but it was very resonant. But then in producing his singing voice, it was placing it, it was using his beautiful technique. Whereas I suppose for baritones, maybe for mezzo sopranos, more of you are already in the voice as speakers that you will use as singers.
Exactly. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
So the not having, it's strange to ask someone what's it like to not think about something, but that's what I meant by natural.
Oh no, very very much so. I definitely feel that way. I mean, it's taken years of training, but to be able to think of going from one to the other, it is a pretty easy transition, and I would say that my speaking voice, matches very much what my, at least the majority of what my singing voice is.
It does, which is great. You were born with a beautiful voice, and you use it incredibly well, as we will explore. But since I brought up the topic of Chicago, I hadn't planned to talk about your relationship with the Lyric Opera of Chicago. I know that you've made Chicago the place where you live, even though you're from Hawaii and you sing in theaters all over the world. Talk about Chicago and that company.
Chicago, for me, represents the last big step of my development, between a studying singer and a working singer. I'd never lived away from home until I moved to Chicago to be a young artist at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. Back then it was called the Lyric Opera Center for American Artists, and now it's called the Ryan Opera Center.
Yes.
And it just, the 3 years of which I was a member of the Opera Center in Chicago, I feel really capped off my study, my growth, my development into an operatic baritone, and really solidifying my Verdi baritone sort of classification. Continued after that, but Chicago means very very much to me, because it was like the icing on the cake for my development as an opera singer. And I love Chicago very very much. The hardest part is that even though my sweet little apartment and my mailing address are there, just to give you a little bit of perspective, I haven't been home since the middle of September, and I won't get home again until the very very end of April. This will have been the longest haul that I've ever been on. So, but it's next year. Next year makes 20 years that I've been in Chicago. And oh no, it means so much, operatically, musically, as well as just the ways that Chicago opened her arms to me, and I'm very proud of it. I just I just wish I could be there more.
Well, I'm going to talk about Chicago a bit, because people know I'm a native New Yorker, but it's my second favorite American city. I happen to love Chicago, and if I couldn't live here, that's where I would live. It's a very very cold city, very hot city in the summer, but stupendous architecture, probably the best in the United States. A very famous symphony orchestra, a wonderful opera company I'll talk about in a moment, a great theater scene, a lot of character, and I mean that not euphemistically, but the people have a lot of character. Everything they do very passionately. It used to be known as America's second city in size. Now it's third after Los Angeles, but the Dallas-Fort Worth area are catching up, and Houston, and so on. So Chicago is adapting, I think, but it's adapting by maintaining most of what's really good about it, and stubbornly not becoming like every other American city, which I think is terrific. It has a beautiful art institute that people are proud of. Engraved outside the Art Institute are names of many of the most famous artists in the world, and they spelled the name Michelangelo wrong on the engraving, and they're proud of it. They're proud of the fact that they spelled his name wrong. And, they point to that as their sort of eccentricity, which it is. Chicago has very particular foods that are not found anywhere else. The amount of saturated fat in the cuisine is kind of extraordinary compared to most places. And they don't, it's fine with them. That's really the point, is that they are who they are and they love it.
Yeah.
Now, operatically, Chicago, as I said, it's the first company I worked at. And when they turned 50, they asked me to write the company history. So I was brought to Chicago to live in the archives for a while and interview people. And what's notable about the Lyric Opera of Chicago, as it's called, is that it was founded November 1st, 1954. And Maria Callas sang before. It was her American debut. Now, remember, Maria Callas was a New Yorker, but she went to Europe to make her career. And the first people to bring her back were the Lyric Opera of Chicago. She sang Norma. She later sang Tosca, and later Madame Butterfly at Chicago. And it's kind of strange. New York had more Renata Tebaldi, even though Tebaldi was from Italy. And our hometown singer, Maria Callas, we had, but not all that much. It took Chicago to do that. Now, Chicago obviously has had opera for many years before the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and they have a wonderful, gorgeous opera house. And typical of the Chicago architecture, it's in a skyscraper. And it's right on the river, on the, I guess is the Chicago River on Wacker Drive.
Yep.
And it's built in there. You wouldn't quite know it's an opera house.
Nope, you could drive right by it. And
if you go to Dresden or New York or Vienna or Milan, you know that's the opera house.
Yep.
In Chicago, it's in a skyscraper, but then you enter and it's absolutely gorgeous and glorious. And how's the acoustic to sing in there?
It's if you're not used to it, it can be a little bit of a chore, because it is quite a barn. It's pretty wide, and it's even deeper, and it's I mean, I think the Met is taller inside.
The Met is definitely taller inside.
But it's a big space, and if you're not careful, you can wear yourself out in there trying to make sure that your voice fills that space. So but
what we call the orchestra and what the British call the stalls in Chicago, it seems much broader than the Met, and it goes back quite far. Maybe physically the Met goes back further, but the Met is also taller. Whereas the tiers, the levels in Chicago are really recessed into the back of the space. Whereas at the Met, they come a little more forward.
Right.
It's more of a horseshoe at the Met. And in Chicago, it's more like a wall. San Francisco is similar that way. How do the acoustics compare singing in Chicago and singing in San Francisco?
Oh, because I don't want to say because. I just feel like, from my own experience, San Francisco is a little easier to sing in. I do remember, not that there's anything wrong singing in Chicago, but I just do remember that the acoustic was a little bit more forgiving is a little more forgiving in San Francisco than in Chicago. You have to get to know that space in Chicago to know how to take advantage of it.
So for listeners elsewhere, the Metropolitan Opera was founded in 1883, although there were opera companies in New York for almost a century, more than a century before. So the opera tradition in New York, New Orleans, and Charleston, South Carolina are the oldest in the United States. The next company, and I believe you sung there, is Cincinnati Opera, founded in 1920. The third company is San Francisco Opera, which is next year going to have its centennial. And Chicago always had opera companies, but financially they always failed. The opera singer, the soprano Mary Garden, ran one for a while. And it has this beautiful opera house and these passionate people who love music, a large German population, a large Italian population in Chicago. So and a big population in general. Therefore, the materials to do opera, but administratively, it never had the right people running it. And then in the early 1950s, a triumvirate of three people got together and began to create the opera company. And it ran well, but it had many years of financial challenges, even though artistically they were wonderful. And it was not until someone named Artis Kranick came along. Artis Kranick was my mentor, which is why I want to pay tribute to her. And she's the person who understood that you had to pay the bills. She made Chicago solvent. She attracted people like Michael Jordan, the basketball player, to come support the opera company. And she united Chicago institutions such as sports and the baseball team, especially the Cubs, and the mayor's office and Chicago food organizations and the museum. She connected them all to the opera, raising the opera's profile, but also giving class to the basketball team. And for 10 years, she created an initiative in which world premieres or rare operas were presented in Chicago. And in her era, Chicago was a city, only Houston came close, in America more than any other, that presented new opera. Wow. And she was very forward thinking that way, because she was, if you met her, a seemingly very traditional Midwestern lady, and politically might have been somewhat conservative. Sure. And she was very religious. And therefore, she would not strike you as the person who would have outrageous opera productions with nudity on the stage. But she understood that that was sometimes the right thing to do. And there were political operas, and she was the first to really present Black composers. There was an opera by Anthony Davis called Amistad that was about a slave ship, and Steven Spielberg later made it into a film, but it began as an opera in Chicago. Wow. And so therefore, I mean, I could wax endlessly about Artis Kranick. She taught me an amazing amount about arts management. And she's a hard act to follow. She died, unfortunately, of cancer in her 60s. Yeah. And people who were her proteges followed, and the company is fine now. But I think that people remember this outsized personality. I'll give you one more example, and then we'll go back to Quinn in Chicago. Most general managers and general directors sit in a box. They sit in a private room when they're attending performances. They're not necessarily that visible. Artis Kranick sat in the front row on the center aisle, left side, and the performance did not begin until, and she was very heavy, until she marched down the aisle and took her seat. So everybody saw her, and she was right over the left shoulder of the conductor. And the singers could see her from the stage. Sure. And I don't know of any other general manager in the world who did that. Right. And she became, and it was not ego at all, but she became the personification of the Lyric Opera Chicago, in that she showed that someone was in charge and responsible. Right. And she could take tough decisions. She, in teaching me, we had lively discussions, because I would disagree with her on things, which she was fine with. But her decisions ultimately always came down to the financial over the artistic. And I felt that sometimes she was making decisions that were artistically costly, but she in effect said, if we can't pay the bills, and Chicago had a legacy of a century of not paying the bills for opera, then we can't do anything else. So I respect that, and I learned from her. You're young, so I don't think you ever met her. I would doubt.
No, I never met her.
But have you heard about her? I mean, the auditorium is named for her at the Lyric Opera Chicago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, tons of folks talked about her all the time. I mean, Sure, whenever we went to some kind of a function or a opening night reception or anything. I mean, sure, it's sort of doctrine that you gotta, you gotta make sure that you pay homage to artist Kranick, at one time or another, because I mean, she will forever be, a force for opera in Chicago, besides her legacy of the company itself.
And I can't think of another person, not a conductor, obviously, but an arts manager who remains in the consciousness of people more than 25 years after her death, and whose impact is so greatly felt. I've known the heads of most of the opera companies of the world and admire them and learn from them and have good relationships with them. But she was just something very different.
Yeah.
And she was not from Chicago. She was from Wisconsin, the state north of Chicago. And prototypical, if you've been to the Midwestern lady with furs and high hair and so on, and heavy and a very strong accent, but an absolute straight shooter and very loving when she would say no, but she knew how to say no. And I once asked her how she felt about critics, and she said, you have to love them. And I thought she was being facetious, and I guess my face said that. And she said, no, really, you have to love them. And the way she repeated it the second time made me think that it's not that she was being indulgent, but that she felt that showing love would ultimately benefit her company.
Sure.
And every single thing artist Kranick did benefited the Lyric Opera of Chicago. Almost to the very end, when she was dying and so on, she implemented a series of measures to make sure that the company continued in a healthy way after this powerful era. It's kind of like, when Boris Godunov dies, what happens then to Russia? I hate to say that now, but we know you know what I mean. In Don Carlo, when everybody dies, what happens to the future of Spain? But it was a similar thing. Artists understood that all of her accomplishments would be for naught if she didn't put in place the proper structure for what came after. And that, to me, was a great managerial style, but also a becoming lack of ego.
Truly.
For someone who had a healthy ego, but she understood that her best legacy would be to create that. So I asked you about this because you came to Chicago after the Kranick era, but her legacy is so powerful. And the Ryan Center, the Center for American Artists, but as it's now known, has produced incredible young artists. And I first heard you, we didn't meet then, but I first heard you when you were a young artist in Chicago.
What was it? What was it, that 50th anniversary year?
It was the 50th anniversary year.
Yeah.
And it was all because I came for all of that. And, if they gave you the program book, I wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also that I went to some of the classes and heard all the students. And it was not my job in that context to go up and work with any of you. So I just sat and listened. But in my checkbox, Quinn Kelsey, immediately, I'm going to see that guy again. And, I don't know if you remember where we actually met. We met in Rome.
That's right.
I knew you were going to be in Rome, and I always need an excuse to go to Rome. And you were in one of my two favorite Verdi operas, Simone Boccanegra. And it was being conducted by Riccardo Muti, who had never conducted Simone Boccanegra. So I
could have fooled me.
Yeah, I know that. But it was interesting. He put that opera off. And by the way, listeners, Riccardo Muti is the music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, an orchestra that has had George Schulte for many years, and Daniel Barenboim and Giulini, fantastic conductors, a legacy of amazing conductors in Chicago. And now it's Riccardo Muti. But he decided that that particular opera required waiting and study and so on. And when it was announced that he was going to undertake it and do it in Rome, frankly, even had you not been playing Paolo, I would have come anyway. But I used the occasion to meet, and we got to know each other there. Talk about working with Riccardo Muti in Verdi.
He requires. I didn't have the job right away, which was very strange to me. That they, as far as I knew, that's what I was going to Rome for. I had planned to go home to Hawaii for Thanksgiving, and then one of the senior music staff in Chicago, as well as one of Chicago's artistic consultants, had both. Well, the artistic consultant had knew there was a need for a Paolo and a Boccanegra cover in Rome, and at the same time, the company reached out to one of the senior music staff in Chicago, knew exactly where he was, knew exactly how to contact him, and both of them gave me these glowing recommendations, and so I could not go. But then I show up, and they said, okay, go to this hotel, and it was right down the street from the Opera House, and you have to sing for Maestro first. I said, okay. Well, what does he want me to sing? He wants you to sing Paolo. I said, okay. And so I sat for like a couple days just staring at my phone, making sure that I didn't miss the phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And the day, after a couple days, I guess it was, met with his assistant, Speranza Scapucci, who is now having
Great
a very
conductor.
healthy career conducting herself. And she was very nice. And she said, yeah, he just wants to hear some of your stuff before he kind of signs off on you. I said, fine. And the great thing was that what they needed in Rome was exactly what I'd done in Chicago. So, I mean, I couldn't have been more prepared for it, but just slightly confused that I had to. I mean, sure, it's Riccardo Muti, and his reputation precedes him, all of that. So it made sense. And so I just met him and shook hands, and whatever you like, Maestro, whatever you want. Okay. And we sang part of this, and we sang part of that, la la. And he said, okay. I said, all right. And he said, but I would like to have one more audition. I said, okay. And he just basically wanted to hear me sing other things. I said, well, and I listed off, Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, Traviata. He said Trovatore. I said, okay. Aria, Cabaletta, fine, okay. And then so Speranza she's very excited. Oh wow, he wants to hear you sing. I said, yeah, okay. She goes, don't worry, I'll bring the music. There's no problem. I said, great. She contacted me when the time was set, and we went into we were in sort of a office, sort of a open space for the initial audition, quote unquote. But then I guess they couldn't get that space, so we were in the chorus rehearsal room, and greeted him again, and oh my God, it's Riccardo Muti, and calm down, it's okay. And Speranza goes and sits behind the piano, and made sure that I was all warmed up and ready to go. And just before we're gonna start, he walks over to her and stops her. You know, she's going to go and get settled and get ready to play. She gets up off the piano bench, Fred, and he sits down and plays my audition.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it was great. I was psyched out in all the most positive ways, but you know, and so I had to totally put it out of my head that this guy was sitting at the piano and playing the accompaniment for my big aria. Oh, and rehearsals were already going. So I just kind of, I would go to rehearsals, and once I finally figured out how to get in the building and get into the house, and I would just sit off on the side and watch, and I would observe him. And you know, I'd heard all kinds of stories about him, all how serious he is, and how strong his personality is. But I'd always known, you know, what wonderful music he produces, and so I just needed to see it for myself. And one of the things that always stick in my head, he was right at the beginning of Act One, and the soprano has her big aria, and the orchestra just kind of, you know, the sound just kind of comes out of a mist or a fog, you know, from nothing. And he'd be so serious. He'd get down in the pit, and he'd close the little door behind him, and he'd pick up the God mic, and he'd say a couple things so that everybody could hear, and then he put it down, and you just felt the energy of everyone just so focused on him. And then he'd pick up the mic and tell some little joke. And so suddenly everyone in the orchestra, literally everyone in the hall would relax just that little bit. But it wouldn't take away any of the conviction and that supreme amount of focus. And it's whether he knew exactly what he was doing, or it was a second nature thing, but it's the way that he even improved the amount of focus and feeling of responsibility that everyone in the room had to make sure that they were paying attention to him. And then the sound that he would get just out of thin air for that very beginning of Act One, and it was just flawless. And I'm sitting in this house, and I'm looking around going, you know, doing the proverbial pinch myself to make sure that I'm awake, that I'm not in some dreamland, that I'm actually sitting in the hall in Rome with Muti in the pit, making this celestial sound that he's pulled literally out of thin air. But then immediately you saw all the ways that he was human too. You know, look over his shoulder as he's conducting, and he's griping or you know, almost chewing his assistant's head off for who knows why. But then you get on stage, and I don't know if he was just being nice to me because I never worked with him before, and I was, you know, felt very much like a foreigner there, of course, or what. But you get on the stage, and you give him as much attention as possible, but you still have to balance. Okay, I don't want the audience to wonder why I'm just deer in the headlights for the conductor, and you know, I'm in a costume, and there's a set, and I should be doing things, and so I didn't want to have that. because that happens too, where conductors require all your attention to where the drama suffers.
Mhm.
But it's whether or not he understood what I was doing, or I don't know, but he gave you all of the body language that you needed. He gave you everything, and you still felt comfortable to move around the stage and emote and do all these things. And it's pretty wonderful. And I understand that someone like him can choose how they want to behave, that they, he some people are really really intimidated by him. And then you see other ways where he has a really comfortable relationship with other people. And I had a wonderful time, and I was so enthralled by his artistry and his responsibility to the art form and the production of the piece on that stage. And I mean, I was stunned in the best way, but also so joyful that I had the opportunity to be a part of that. I mean,
Mhm.
I wonder if I'd have felt differently if for example, I had been singing the lead and not the smaller part. And so, number one, my responsibility for the production was not really anything at all. But who knows? I mean, and so then the only other thing that I wonder is what it would be like to sing a real role with
Mhm.
him conducting. If that would change, how it would change.
Well, I hope you find out. You anticipated a question I was going to ask you so perfectly. It's as if I had sent you the question before, namely, did Muti sit down at the piano or did he listen? Because for people listening to us, it often is the case that a conductor, a stage director, or someone doing the hiring will sit in the auditorium, and someone on the stage, a répétiteur, an assistant conductor, will play the piano for the singer who's standing there singing out into the auditorium. The physical relationship when you have your maestro, your conductor, at the piano and you are right there is an entirely other sensation. It does not necessarily happen now with a lot of younger conductors,
No.
but there's an old school tradition that Muti certainly belongs to and attaches himself to, where the maestro, which means not only conductor but teacher, would be at the keyboard. Ambrogio Maestri, your baritone colleague, told me that he learned the entire role of Falstaff from Riccardo Muti, with Muti at the piano,
Oy.
teaching him the role in
Wow.
about 2000, 2001. Because I happened to go to Maestri's first, I didn't know of him then, but I happened to go to his very first Falstaff with Muti conducting in a tiny theater in Busseto, where Verdi was from. And Barbara Frittoli sang Alice Ford. By the way,
Wow.
listeners, Barbara Frittoli joins me here on April 1st. And it was a wonderful cast in a tiny theater. So Muti scaled musically everything down to the size of the theater, but he felt this was the place where Ambrogio Maestri, destined to become a fantastic Falstaff, should start his career, not at La Scala, not in Parma, not in another major theater, Vienna, but in this little theater. And his approach to teaching, leading, communicating opera, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's rare nowadays.
Yes.
And that's part of why I was interested in how he approached you, and you confirmed what I suspected. You and I have never spoken about this before, so I'm glad that I brought it up. Um, was that your first time in Italy?
No,
No.
but it was my first time singing Italian opera in Italy.
Okay. I don't know if you remember that one of the challenges you faced was how Italians do their laundry. And
It's a challenge I face most of the times that I come to Europe.
but actually I helped you do your laundry because they didn't have a dryer, because in Italy you have a clothesline and you
Right.
wash your clothing and you hang out
Right.
your clothes.
Mhm.
And that was a new thing to you. Even you come from a sunny place, but I guess in Hawaii they use clothes dryers.
I mean, I mean, it wasn't a huge. I wasn't greatly stunned, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was just okay. Well, what do we do this time?
But I mean, it was funny because we just meet and the first thing we do is laundry. This is what people at opera do. We do laundry.
Exactly.
You have been called many, 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 many times a Verdi baritone.
Sure.
And the category, I think we know what it means, but I also think that it's become a catch-all for talented baritones who sing Verdi. So let's talk not so much about what does it mean to be a Verdi baritone, but how do you, number one, how do you engage with his music? But number two, is the Verdi baritone of Rigoletto different from the one of Traviata or Simone Boccanegra or Posa or Iago? Let's pick all the roles you want, or Ford. These are all Verdi baritone roles. But I
Sure.
don't imagine you engage in the same way, although maybe I'm wrong. So you tell me.
Okay. What first?
How do you engage with, let's call it the aesthetic of Giuseppe Verdi? Do you start with the notes? You start with the words? You start with research of the character? You start with research of Verdi?
I'd like to think that in my experiences in, let's say, in the last 12 or 13 years, because that's kind of when I was first given Verdi roles. Actually, no. 2000, so 14 years, because I started singing Traviata and Trovatore 13 and 14 years ago. In my experiences, I guess I'm just going to group this together. No, the approach for different Verdi roles is not always the same. Mm-hmm. While a role like Rigoletto is very strenuous just because of all the stage time, there are times when a role like Di Luna in Trovatore can be much more demanding. I would say that roles like Boccanegra, Carlo in Forza, mm-hmm. Nabucco, Iago. These are definitely roles that I am just now arriving at, whereas the ones that I have already been sufficiently acquainted with, Di Luna and Trovatore, Germont, Traviata, Amanasso in Aida. can go either way, but I guess because it's not it's not a big role at all, that it's that's partly why I've been allowed to do it so soon. Ezio and Attila, and then of course the lead in Rigoletto is also sort of an exception for me, because I guess normally Rigoletto would be the first in line of that second group, just because of the, you know, the ways that this second grouping of roles behave slightly differently, carry more vocal weight to them than the others that I mentioned before. And so generally, in my humble opinion, this is the sort of the dividing line, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that for Rigoletto, I was given the green light really early, whereas normally a Verdi type baritone would pull Rigoletto off the shelf in his later 30s or 40. And
by the way, happy birthday. You're about to turn 43. 44?
44.
Oh, okay. Well, you look good.
Thank you. Yeah, that whether it was planned for me to debut Rigoletto earlier than most, or that's just the way that it played out. I debuted the role in Oslo in
2011.
Right about this time. So exactly 11 years ago.
Just, you know, I'm going to interrupt. I made a list. 2011, Oslo, Toronto. 2013, Zurich, where you also sang it in 2016, 2019, and 2022. 2014, English National Opera, I assume in English. 2015, Santa Fe. 2016, Paris, where I saw it. Honolulu. 2017, Frankfurt, San Francisco, where I saw it again. Chicago. 2021, Vienna, and the Met.
Yeah, except obviously because 2021 we're smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. Vienna never happened.
Vienna never happened. Okay.
Yeah.
It will. Yeah.
It will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is you've been doing it in effect for 10 years in many different productions in many different cities.
Mm-hmm.
You are a perennial favorite, I know, from friends in Zurich, because they keep calling you back to do it. And it's a wonderful opera house to sing in too. But I can tell you, having seen Paris, San Francisco, and New York, that those productions are all very different. And therefore, what you as an actor, not a singer, but as an actor are called on to do are very, very different in each case. So what I want to know about is, having done this role now for 10 years, what part of your Rigoletto remains Quinn Kelsey's Rigoletto, and what part maybe has been added to or changed or maybe corrupted by some of these less than good productions? Some of the productions have been excellent. The current New York is a very good one. So therefore, it's not that your Rigoletto, I would guess, is the same every single time. He becomes different based on the production, the colleagues, the conductor.
Sure. It's always mine, no matter what. More so, I feel, and I've come to this via a lot of different aspects, it will always be mine. By default, I feel the responsibility when you are the lead, no matter what it is, that you, unless the production and or the concept just don't make any sense at all, I feel it's the singer's responsibility as the lead to own and accept the production for what it is. Just because, if nothing else, if you grow to be too nitpicky about too many things, then we might as well just trash the whole thing and start over. And obviously we can't do that. And so I've always felt it's much better to just accept it at face value and work it out. And the great thing about a new production is that you have that opportunity to collaborate and, you know, offer insights. I mean, the great thing about having just over a decade worth of experience with the role in different productions, that until now, I haven't felt like I had enough experience, but now I can say, you know, I can, you know, I mean, not that you put it on a button and put it on your chest, but just to be able to know that you have, that you can call on the experience that you've had, and at the same point to still be responsible in your offering of opinions or ideas. But the great thing about a new production is that you can.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what, I know for a fact that no matter what production I do, it'll always be mine. And I like to take advantage of a different production just to start over,
Mm-hmm.
apply everything that I've learned, everything that I've done in past productions. Having this much experience in a role like this allows me so many tools. I was so looking forward to starting rehearsals in New York, because number one, it's the Met.
Mm-hmm.
And so the environment is always so heavily conducive to really, you know, great products, as you have seen, you know, year after year. And so I knew that it would just be such a positive medium for what exactly we could come up with, you know, based on what Bart had already achieved in
Bart
Berlin.
Shear, the stage director.
Yes,
Yep.
sir. What Bart had achieved already, and you know, taking his reimagined platform from the Berlin production, I mean, you know, and just sort of starting over for myself, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's always been very, very healthy to kind of wipe the slate clean, apply it to something else, and rebuild. And after, you know, once you've done the opera enough, you have the general framework of how things have to work. And then, you know, as you go, you just you go by that framework. And then if you run into something that doesn't quite jive, well, then you say, you know, this I have a question because you want to do this, and the map of the story says this, and so how do you want to do that? And and things like that tend to work themselves out. But it's just it's very healthy for me, because it allows me to reimagine what the story could be like, and I enjoy now. By now I enjoy it, and it makes it easier to produce something, something different.
I want
And
to, I want to tell listeners that you and your cast, your excellent colleagues, appeared in an HD transmission in late January. And I know that in some places it will be rebroadcast in cinemas on April 9th and maybe other places elsewhere. But then you're coming back for another run of live performances in the spring.
that's right.
And it will be you and a whole other cast, but you're, I believe, the only holdover, certainly the major players from the
Uh,
original.
I don't know what happened for the second cast, but suddenly they said, well, we've had a cancellation, and we want to know if you want to do it. And I was already going to be there for some bohèmes, and
Right.
I said, sure, I would love to do it. Are you guys okay with me doing bohème and Rigoletto? And they said, well, is there will be days where you'll have Rigoletto rehearsals and then a bohème in the evening. And I said, that's fine with me. When I go to the rehearsals, it's called marking, or just not singing, so that when I actually have to do the singing for the paycheck, then everything will be fine. Trust me. They said, yeah, it's fine. I said, great, I'll do it.
I want to, just as an aside, tell listeners, I think I said this to you in the past, and if not, I'll say it to you now. You are the most sympathetic Marcello in La Boheme that I can name. And because I've seen you play bad guys like Paolo, and Rigoletto is a conflicted character, but very often, I know you don't intend to do this, but you completely steal the scene from me and Rodolfo and Musetta for me, because do you have a special feeling for Marcello? Is this how you are as a friend? Because your Marcello is such a good friend, and but not just to Rodolfo, but also to me, and you're very patient most of the time with Musetta. And your Marcello creates such a different environment in the production of La Boheme, performance of La Boheme, that I've seen you in. I've seen you 4 or 5 times doing it. Talk about how you develop your Marcello. I'm sure a lot of people don't ask you about Marcello, but I want to know.
Well, he's not a jerk. He gets grouchy with her, with Musetta in the latter half of Act 3, and he's quite crabby and grouchy in Act 2 when she shows up, because obviously they've been on a hiatus, or whatever you want to call it. But the text and the music doesn't lead you to believe that he's a jerk, that he holds a grudge, and so it just wouldn't make sense if he did, or if he had some sort of underlying disdain or ill will at all. And and they're all the four boys, they're good guys. They do with what they have, and they genuinely enjoy each other. I mean, they're typical friends. They know exactly when they can take pot shots at one another, but it's all, and none of it ever becomes ill or evil, and it's such a feel good story that it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work if Marcello was a jerk. In the duet in Act 4, he genuinely misses Musetta, and the way, and the two of them mirror one another in the duet, talking about their own girlfriends. yeah, it wouldn't work otherwise. And so the that's just the direction that the storytelling points the character in. And that's, you know, that's for me, that's how that character works.
Well, I'm going to prod you and take it further, because
Sure.
that character, I mean, I've worked on about 7 productions, including I worked on the original Zeffirelli production, The Met in 1981, with Carreras and Teresa Stratas and Renata Scotto. And so I know from Zeffirelli himself what his vision was for that production. And it's the
Okay.
most seen and performed production in Met history. I think
Sure.
at least 350 times that production has been done. And he saw Marcello as simpatico, but I see you taking him further, the kind of humanity that you see in certain German roles, like Hans Sachs in Meistersinger, like Rocco in Fidelio, that he is almost the philosopher as much as Colline. And I mean, when you do it, his approach is philosophical. It's not just easygoing. It really seems anchored in the belief that this is the way life is, and this is how we have to be with one another. I sometimes see Rodolfo as not necessarily the most sympathetic character, because as he flails about trying to decide how to deal with Mimi, he does her harm. May not mean to, but he does her harm. And when you play Marcello opposite some of those Rodolfos, I feel in you that you, Marcello, know what's going to happen. And you gently foreshadow that in Act 3 of what's going to come in Act 4. I would also say Puccini and his music foreshadows it, but you seem to have picked up on that and take it. I never mean overacting, but there's just something deep in your portrayal that I feel what's coming in Act 4, not from me and her coughing, but from you, Marcello. So that when it comes to pass, I feel when you're in Act 4 singing about your girlfriend's not being there and not coming back, that you have a sense that something bad is going to befall Mimi. And so you become the through line for the story. The title character is La Boheme, the Bohemian girl, but the witness is Marcello, at least the way you play him. Am I onto something?
No, I mean, you know, it's probably just because my my father, the English professor, you know, it's all about storytelling, and he and I love to tell a story to a fault, many times. So I'm sure I never mean to, but I'm sure it's just the fact that my subconscious mind in a lot of times does know, not as Marcello, but just as Quinn the opera singer, storyteller, what will happen, and can't bring myself not to sort of, you know, precede that. I never, honestly, I never mean to do it, but no, I know exactly what you mean. That's definitely Quinn's take on Marcello. That's how Quinn would be Marcello, with knowing what I know of those 3 guys, and the strong sense of camaraderie that I know that they all have, and that everyone knows about my girlfriend. Everyone knows about how Rodolfo's emotion will take him too far, but you never knock him for that, because that's always who he's been, and you know, for example, that you need to take the initiative and smack him around a little bit and you know, bring him back on course, because he will just, you know, jump off a proverbial cliff once in a while. But I mean, he's the writer, he's the storyteller, and so he lives his stories a little bit too much, and so you know this about him, and you know that his emotions will run away from him, and that's one of your responsibilities as one of his friends, is to kind of grab him by the ear or to rein him in, and so then Quinn sees Marcello as the guy who will take care of everyone. You know, no, don't do that. No, everything's going to be fine. Come here. That's what Quinn would do. And I don't know. I guess it works. I enjoy it.
Oh, it definitely works. But I won't use the word analyze because I don't like to analyze, but I love experiencing and then seeing what remains in me after. When I watch a performance, I assure you I don't analyze. If I'm analyzing, I recently went to a performance where it was just not very good. And I analyzed because I found myself figuring out what was not working. And it didn't work on many levels: the production, the conducting, the lighting, just all kinds of things really didn't work. So therefore, I allow myself to study why and then think what could they have done that would make it better.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I genuinely don't analyze. And in your performances, I never analyze. I don't want to. I like to just really take them in and live them. So therefore, something you just said made me think of something I'd not thought about regarding your Marcello. Namely, yes, Rodolfo's the writer, and we expect him to have a certain kind of knowledge of human behavior. Your character is a painter, a visual artist.
Mm-hmm.
And at least the way you play him, it's not what he puts on the canvas, it's what he sees. So therefore, your Quinn's Marcello responds to what he sees. And I think that's kind of a key to it. Yeah. And I'm saying all this because many of us have been to so many Bohèmes. It takes a special reason to go back to see Bohème again. And
thank you.
But it's true. And therefore, if people are in New York, I believe it's May, go see it. I don't even know who else is in the cast, but I really just want them to experience your Marcello. And also, it is a wonderful production if you've never seen it. So it merits seeing for that reason. Let's go back to Rigoletto.
Yes.
I believe that opera is the perfect opera. There's just nothing wrong with it. That you could ask questions about certain motivations. You could say that the device of having a curse is kind of old-fashioned in terms of dramaturgy, that a la maledizione, it's the curse that revisited me again. But and that's why I think this opera doesn't update very well, because in more recent times where a curse may not have the same impact as it would in 1485. Sure. But nonetheless, it's one of those works, I think, whereas if the artist involved, the producers, the conductor, the singers, commit to what Verdi and Piave created, and you have the talent, that's all you need to make it be an excellent performance. And it's an opera more than probably any other, including La Traviata and Bohème, where it's an easy cry for an audience member if the performance is done right.
Sure.
It can't not be. And if I take someone to Rigoletto, I did this once, I was on a date, and she didn't respond to it. That told me a lot about the person I brought, because the performance was stunning. And she was cold to it. She said, well, what a stupid girl that Gilda is. Well, she makes mistakes, but not quite the stupid girl. So anyway, here's a stratagem for people going out on dates. Take the person you want to date to Rigoletto, and if he, she, they don't Don't respond. You don't want that person.
No pressure on the opera.
But I mean, is there anything wrong that you would fix with the dramaturgy? I don't think there's anything wrong at all with the music, but anything in the dramaturgy that you think needs addressing?
No, no. I mean, any little corners or things. I mean, most times can be ironed out in the production or I mean, different productions behave differently, and so you hope that that the singers understand what they need to do to come halfway, musically, vocally, dramatically through the music to meet the physicality of the production and make something complete. But I mean, there will there's never a 100% guarantee that's always going to be that way. There have been people who weren't totally happy with the production at the Met in January, but I mean, the entire environment notwithstanding, the production, I felt, I guess, just for all the attention that I was able to get out of it, allowed us to tell a lot of the story. As the curtain came down, I at the end, I could look back on what had happened since the downbeat and feel feel quite confident that we had told a complete story, that the production allowed us to do this, that we're able to give enough attention, from scene to scene, from moment to moment, to create that arc, that complete arc of the story from the beginning to the end. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes there are spots that kind of break up that arc in other productions, but so far this has been one of my favorite ones, just for everything that I feel that we've accomplished. And and then I'll get to do it all over again in the spring, and I don't know, hope that maybe we squeeze out some new little ideas that we hadn't thought of at the end of last year, the beginning of this year. And but yeah, it's I'm looking forward to that. And it just I have to understand, the lead has to understand the responsibility they have, no matter what. I mean, even if it's a quick revival and you're only going to get a week and a half of rehearsals to put it on its feet, but the lead will always have to understand the responsibility they have for carrying the majority of the storytelling, and whether it's actually on the stage or in the process of the rehearsal period. That's just how that goes.
I think that Verdi, in this opera, in all of his operas, but this one more than any other, and I think Boccanegra may come close, not because it's a father-daughter story, but when I listen to the score, in other words, the orchestral passages, I find that Verdi is telling us about the title character almost always, even if someone else is on the stage. So, for example, in Boccanegra, when it's Amelia on the stage, who happens to be his daughter, but that doesn't come out right away. We know in Rigoletto who his daughter is. That Verdi interlaces music that always tells us about the heart and the soul of the father of Boccanegra or of Rigoletto. I, in Rigoletto, can hear, I'm going to say, your heart racing, your anxiety, your anticipation of thoughts, your realization, I didn't think of that. I've been, they've deceived me. All of that is so fantastically narrated in Verdi's music that when I take people to see Rigoletto, and assuming that they're not bored by, they think the characters are silly, I try to explain, don't read the titles. I will tell you the story ahead of time. Don't read the titles. Verdi narrates every single thing in his orchestration. So my question for you, as someone who plays the title character, is, to what degree does Verdi's music, that's not the singing line, but the orchestral lines, affect your performance?
Oh, 100%. I know exactly what you mean. Crazy that someone from a time that seems so long ago figured this out, and that it still has so much function in a modern world, you know, that or that it's still, it's not an old-fashioned sort of an idea. The fact that you would weave themes and melodies that are so much one character, outline one specific character all the time, and then when they come back, it just makes you go, wait a minute. I mean, that's something that I would, that's a structure or a trick that I would, if I didn't know any better about classical music or opera, that I would expect to have come up in the last 60, 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, using those melodies and little bits of music to show the to sort of bring that other character into a scene that they're not actually in physically.
Mm-hmm.
And what a wonderful way to just enhance the storytelling like that. And you know, when a certain scene is happening, and then you hear this other person's music, and you know that you know it, because when you know, so much of the time that other person is on the stage, those are that melody or that little bit of music keeps coming back, and so in your head you immediately come to recognize that music as that person's music. And how fascinating that the composer knows to bring that back, but sometimes very, very subtly. And I mean, it's, again, storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It just it completes the storytelling. You know, it makes it adds extra layers that aren't ever invasive into the in the moment, but just sort of, you know, make sure that you realize that they're still there, you know, and adding a color to the emotion of the immediate moment. I mean, it's really brilliant. And
I think you use a key word that I've never heard used this way before: invasive. that is there as part of the total storytelling narrative picture in words and music, but it's not invasive. It doesn't underline for itself and for everyone else, hey, look what I'm doing. It occurred to me this opera was written and premiered in 1851. Sigmund Freud was born in 1856, and therefore the vocabulary of modern psychology that we all use so freely and often mistakenly nowadays didn't exist in Verdi's time. And therefore, the psychology in the opera Rigoletto and in the character Rigoletto was pre-Freudian. And Verdi's understanding of human nature was so profound, like your Marcello, that it completely changes how we experience it, because he put in the music all that psychology, but he didn't have the, I guess, didn't have the vocabulary. Yes, we could read stories from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, fables, myths, Shakespeare, and come to understand human psychology, but it didn't have the terminology. It had the immediacy of life experience, and
Right.
everybody would know if your daughter went missing. Et tutta la mia familia, she's my whole family, she's my entire family, to me is the most powerful line in the whole opera for me, because it says everything about Rigoletto, the character.
Sure.
Even, I mean, he's a very flawed character. He's very lacerating with his tongue. He's quick-witted, but he can be offensive, politically incorrect, whatever. Not that they cared about that back then. But it raises a question I have that I've never asked a gentleman who sings Rigoletto. In our contemporary times, where we often with justification try to express sensitivity and concern about people who are different in one way or another, Rigoletto historically was described as hunchback, deformed, crippled, paralyzed, whatever word we want to use. But in other words, I think that his being a jester comes in part from his being an outsider, from his being physically not, he's not Richard III, but on the other hand, he's not the handsome, beautifully attired Duke of Mantua. He is something else, and gets by on his wit and gets by on his cleverness and gets by a bit on being the outsider who can, in certain Shakespeare plays, the fool who speaks to the king,
Right.
King Lear, and only the fool can get to speak to the king that way without being punished. I imagine you've been in productions that, well, background. I studied this opera. My teacher was Tito Gobi, and Tito Gobi he did drawings of all the characters he was going to play so that he could form his gesture, his physicality, his makeup. And Tito Gobi at that time, 50 years ago, had quite the hump on his hunchback. And now there are productions where we don't see that. There are productions where Rigoletto doesn't have a dragging arm. And I'm not saying he should, but what I'm saying is different cultures, different societies, different aesthetics embrace or reject those depictions. To what degree do you feel that in creating a character, in this case Rigoletto, that he conform to the original conception of the composer and librettist?
I mean, because I've played the different degrees of being handicapped with this character, personally, I'm not one who believes it's so important that he have the big hump, that he hobble on one leg. I definitely agree with it when it's when a director or a production designer decide that they want the character to go that way. But it's not so terribly vital. I mean, nowadays, you know, there's you know, the the handicap could totally be mental, and it's and for this opera, for this character, it's very easy to play it that way. um I I like physical challenges for interpretation of a character. um I like the challenge of having to make sure you don't forget. Oh yeah, you know, your one leg is supposed to be shorter than the other, so don't suddenly start walking upright, you know. And I like I like that challenge of having to hold on to that part of the physical characterization. But no, it's not critical for me. As I say, there's so many there's so many different ways to portray it, and to the extent where if you needed me, you know, if the director or the production designer needed me to figure it out, I mean, you know, you could give me just a few things, and I could, just because of my experience with this role alone, I could, you know, I could figure something out.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's nice to have something specific to play off of, knowing that you've got the big hump, knowing that you know, that you have specific physical deformities or whatever it is, and just remembering that you got to do them.
Mhm.
um it all in all, becoming a character uh is a wonderful escape for me. I almost feel self-conscious in rehearsals because it's just me in street clothes, having to do all this stuff that I, you know, all this body language that I don't do in public, you know, as Quinn Kelsey.
Mhm.
And so it's actually easier to lose myself in the character once we're on stage in costume and makeup. Then I feel even more comfortable to climb outside of myself and put on this other human being.
Mhm.
um but it's not, no, it's not critical. I could be, because I enjoy doing something different every time. It's that's enough. I mean,
Mhm.
the production in Frankfurt, he had no physical deformity. I mean, I think they built a hump into his costume, but I don't think there was a whole lot, you know. And
Mhm.
then San Francisco, which was the same production that Chicago did later on that same year as Frankfurt. I think it was just, you know, uh, showing some sort of deformity in in the way that he moved. You know, the Met production, I think he, in a way, he puts it on as part of the character, but when he's his normal self, he doesn't.
Mhm.
So I mean, there's more than one way to play the, you know, the physical challenges of Rigoletto. You know, and
I
like
guess my
they don't
thinking
even.
is that there are and always will be, unfortunately, people with disabilities, and it's our attitudes towards them. But I don't. My belief is that we're not supposed to pretend they don't exist.
at all.
and the characters who have them that we're supposed to suddenly decide we're going to liberate them from their disability. This
Mm,
is why I said before that I think that more than most Verdi operas, Rigoletto does not update well, because the
sure.
values are of its time and place, 1485 in Mantua. And in Italy, I've been living and working and studying in Italy for 50 years. I remember when a person with a disability was an object of pity, of sometimes scorn, was seen as a curse on the family, not as someone to love equally for his or her wonderful values and character and so on, but a burden. And there was the ufficio per i disabili, in other words, an office, a special place where the disabled were seen to. They were often, frankly, locked away. And
Mhm.
I knew many families who would have a relative who was locked away, who maybe was mentally disabled, but often physically disabled. In Italy, because the architecture of the streets are such, it's hard to get about. I've had my periods of disability. I broke my leg at the Rome Opera, actually. And so therefore, I've gone about Italy in crutches and wheelchairs and casts and such. Now it's a nation of volunteerism, of more inclusiveness. The church has tended to be on the side of all of God's children, so to speak. But in an opera context in 1485, a man who is a jester, who is disabled, is looked at a little bit with pity, but also as unlovable. And therefore, to me, Rigoletto's desperate clinging to his one family member, to his daughter, is also about the fact that he's not loved by anyone else. His
Right.
wife has died. And Giovanna, who works for them, for her, it's just a job. She doesn't really love or respect Rigoletto. It's her paycheck. And I think, therefore, we need to understand the values of then. We're not supposed to impose our values of now. And we hope that we have improved regarding people with disabilities and physical and mental challenges. But to pretend that they don't exist and didn't back then is to not honor the intentions of the creators of the opera. That's my opinion.
Mm.
Um,
Indeed.
yeah. In La Gioconda, there's La Cieca, the blind old mother, and she's called the blind lady. So if we suddenly made her not blind, what how does that benefit? We worry about her falling into the Venice Canal because it's set in Venice. There's all that. La Gioconda, the woman, has to take care of her mother more because her mother is blind. And I've seen people say, no, we don't want to have blind characters in opera. Porgy and Bess, I've seen many versions lately of Porgy and Bess where Porgy can walk with crutches, but he can walk. Part of the story of that is that he is supported by the women in the community, but he's not seen as a man who can have a relationship with a single woman, and in part because of his disability. So to make him walk about robs all that.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Yeah. So I'm going to go in an entirely different direction. Two more things, and then if you want to ask me anything or bring anything up, feel free. You jumped in as an opera term for suddenly appearing in a performance where you were not scheduled or expected, not like where they will ask you now for May, can you appear as Rigoletto? But you jumped in recently as Scarpia in Dresden while in rehearsals for Amonasro in Aida that you're going to sing tomorrow. Talk about jumping in as an experience, not just in Dresden, but what it requires of a singer that's different from being in the rehearsal process.
Nerves of steel. Because jumping in most times means the day or two within a couple days of a performance, something happens, a singer gets sick or breaks an arm or something, and it's too last minute to be able to work someone else in, someone who's been in rehearsals or something, and so they have to just call someone to literally jump in. And this is something that's way more acceptable here in Europe, because Europe is all of Germany, France, Austria, Spain, Italy is a lot closer together. And at the most you're talking about a 2-hour flight, if that, but usually you're talking about an hour, 2-3 hour train ride, and then you're wherever you need to be. But yeah, it's never an ideal situation, because at the least you know what you're singing, but if it's not a semi-stage concert or a concert performance, what the hell are you supposed to do? Because everybody else in this production was in rehearsals for however long it was, and there's there's specific staging, and the fact that, well, I know what the words are, and I know who I'm supposed to sing with at each point, but I don't know where the hell I'm supposed to go from
let's
the
start
first
with
entrance.
the music. Your head was deep into Amonasro. You recently came from here having sung Rigoletto, and you went to Germany, and you are now rehearsing, and you premiere tomorrow Amonasro in Aida. And when's the last time you sang Scarpia? And can you just pull Scarpia from your head, or do you have to go back to the music to reacquaint yourself?
The last time I sang it was the latter half of July. I pride myself in my abilities of memory. The easiest way to characterize it is how my mother would put it. She goes, I know you're good at memorizing because you just hated having to hold the music. and I at the time I wasn't so sure that that's what it was, but yeah, that sounded good. So yes, yeah, that's exactly what it is. I don't like holding the music. She was right to an extent. That it was more convenient to not have to look at the music, and so that's why I work so hard to memorize music. The thing with Scarpia is that it's a role that I've been waiting to do, and to have actually sung it almost in its entirety. The 3 productions I've now done have not been complete.
Okay.
So if you put all those 3 together, I've sung the whole role. But it was when I actually when I had to seriously prepare Tosca. A year ago, because the first production was an abbreviated sort of concert production in Philadelphia, you know, it was at the point that, okay, this is happening for real. So I better break open that score and get to it. And you know, I recognize the Te Deum and there are other specific parts of it, but it was nice to actually acquaint myself with the role, and the fact that it's still relatively fresh in my mind made it comforting that I had one rehearsal to sort of get comfortable with it, and that's it. But no, I've been looking forward to this role for a while, and so just the excitement of having another opportunity to perform it again at all really drove me to be ready to go. And the only thing I had to do was to shove into memory the first 5 minutes. From the point that Scarpia makes his initial entrance in Act 1 until the moment where she enters, and then everything after that was stuff that I'd done. But okay. In this case, just the fact that I was going to have the opportunity to sing it again at all was enough of a inspiration. But still, it can be really stressful, even if you've sung your whole role for whatever opera it is, cover to cover. You know, you're still kind of jumping off that cliff with your, you know, with your eyes closed and not sure what's going to happen.
Right.
So
finally, because I want to let you get a good night's rest before you do Amanasra tomorrow in Dresden, none other than Ferruccio Furlanetto, who is in my pantheon. I never say my favorite, but if I had to pick a very, very small list of my absolute favorite artists, Ferruccio Furlanetto would certainly be on there. I saw you perform with him in Toronto. He's the kind of artist I travel to where he is to see him perform, just because I want another opportunity to see Ferruccio Furlanetto. And when I began this show 2 years ago, he was, I think, my 5th or my 6th guest. I didn't want him as my first guest because I wanted to learn how to do the show a bit. But once I felt confident, then Ferruccio Furlanetto was on. And Ferruccio is tall, you're tall. I don't know who's taller, but I think he might be a little taller. I'm not as tall. And I remember that he came and he sort of put his hand on my shoulder and he said in his bass voice, he said, "You know, Quinn is my baby." And what he meant by that is that, I mean, not because there's a large age difference, but he had a very profound paternal feeling for you. You were playing Sancho Panza to his Don Quixote in the Massenet version of the famous Spanish tale, and a young mezzo-soprano who's gone on to big things, Anita Rachvelishvili, was playing Dulcinea, and therefore a rather remarkable performance in Toronto that the company very wisely had the foresight to pick a great star and these two fantastic young artists. What did you learn working from and with Ferruccio Furlanetto about your profession, about singing, about anything? Because obviously he had a very strong feeling for you. He would not say that to me if he didn't mean it.
Oh no, he's definitely the type of person who wouldn't say anything if he didn't feel like it. No, but if I've learned anything from him, it's that being classy is one of the best things to be. That man is all class, very well spoken, very, very intelligent. You know, he never, he never talks out of turn. He never says anything he doesn't mean.
Mhm.
He'll always take an extra breath to form the thoughts in his head before he opens his mouth. And it's just, he is, he is an amazing human being. Um, I try as much as possible to get together with him whenever we're in the same place, just because of the fact that he as much as he chose to took me under his wing. And I mean I don't know if there's a more meaningful moment than that for a young artist. You know, I mean, the kind of validation um a relationship like that can have, you know. And I mean, I wasn't necessarily looking for something like that, but he was so giving and so generous with his attention. And you know, and we had done Attila in San Francisco. That was the first time. Attila in
Mhm.
San Francisco in the summer of 12. And then in the fall of 12 was Boca Negra in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then the spring of 14 was the Don Quixote. And it got better and better, you know, to get to work with him again and work with him again. And I mean, every at the end of every performance, you know, and he's, you know, he's on the ground and I have his head resting in my lap, and I'm cradling him like this. And you know, the end of every performance, and he's just basically singing for me. For me, it's like, forget all of you guys out there. I'm glad you paid your money. My turn. And what poignant moments, and so tender and so meaningful. And I mean, he's really a wonderful man. And I feel it's because of the amount of friendship and that and connection that he's offered. You know, it's so important to maintain that. You know, I know he'll be in New York when I get back. So, you know, at the very least, I'll reach out and invite him to dinner, just to sit and talk. And
Mhm.
you know, tell him, you know, he's that extended family, you know, uncle type. And you know, in a specific way, he wants to know what you've been doing. um you know, not that he be the type of person to judge you for everything, judge you or not for whatever you've done, but that you know that he's genuinely curious. And so
Mhm.
that's one of the things that you do. You sit down and make you know, catch him up.
On
But
what's going on.
he's yeah,
So
but he's
listeners
a,
should know that when you're doing Rigoletto, Ferruccio will be in town in a production of Turandot as Timur, with the Ukrainian soprano Lyudmila Monastyrska in the title role. And that will be on HD. I should know the date. I know it's a Saturday in May. I don't know it off the top of my head because I didn't think we'd be talking about that today, but um, I know it's probably in the middle of May, around his birthday and my birthday. Both of us, yeah. So, Quinn, thank you. Thank you for your candor, your deep reflectiveness on everything. I always know that when I have a conversation with you, I learn stuff. And that is terrific because you really are very thoughtful and very connected to what you do. It shows. This is why audiences respond to you. You have a gorgeous voice, yes, but if you didn't bring all these other things to it, it would just be a gorgeous voice. And this is what I always want people to know about you when they go to a performance, because you're Ferruccio's baby. That's what I'm saying. That's the ultimate compliment that I think anybody could be accorded in the opera profession.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So thank you so much. I will see you myself in May. I look forward to it.
Yes, sir.
And you be well. And I thank you for everything you do.